We need land rights, but the fact remains that most of us women who have them would rather not ask for them, would rather pass it on in favor of our brothers and sisters. Brothers, not our sisters. I will begin with Renu Roy. You became economically empowered at a time when it was next to impossible for women to be so, and especially on stage. How difficult was it, and what did you fight against?
Well, to cut a very long story short, somewhere, because one had the privilege of education, the first panel prioritized it, education, good family values. One felt and one was convinced that the woman is naturally empowered. We believed in the tradition of Shakti. The woman symbolizes courage and confidence. She was, through the annals of history, maybe when subjugated, she was dominated, she was relegated, she was oppressed, suppressed, but not weak. We, as a family, believed that the woman was strong. And she was made to feel and believe that she was weak and vulnerable and helpless, insecure and afraid. So when I finished my education, and that was at the master's level, I had a father who said, okay, we have to get you married, like all good girls in average Hindu families. I wanted to do my PhD in other things, but no, the marriage part was important, so I got married.
So you mean to say you weren't given a choice?
Very quickly after marriage, I felt suddenly, maybe paradoxically, disempowered.
Mm-hmm.
I felt disempowered because I had no independence, I had no economic independence. I had the education. I had no economic independence. I didn't have a property to my name. I just didn't know what to do. And I was told, in spite of being married into a very nice family, that whatever you do on your own. You're educated. So I said to myself, I earn today as a school teacher 300 rupees. Maybe that's about 2 pounds today. 3 pounds today. What can I do? How do I fulfill my dreams of 100 things? I want to do a lot of theater. I want to produce, direct, and write theater. I want to do films. I want to debate. I want to do art. I want to write a book. I want to start a cultural foundation. How do I do it? To cut, again, a very long story short, the gory and the glorious part of it is that the key factor of determination. I want to do it, so I will do it. And 40 years later, I find that part of that got fulfilled because I created the opportunity, or at least I knocked on several doors, and opportunities came, and every one of those wishes I was able to fulfill to an extent.
Thank you, thank you. From the very empowered to someone who works with extremely disempowered women, Urmi, we need to know how you deal with the fact that there are thousands and thousands of helpless women and girls who have absolutely, seemingly no control over their destiny. Where do you start empowering them?
I think we have to go back to the previous session, as Anuradha just mentioned. Definitely we begin with education. But before you make education available to this set of people who've been completely disempowered, abused, and neglected and treated more or less like objects, you need to create a situation where education can be made available. And in our present structure, that doesn't work. We do have our Sarva Shiksha Abhijan, and we have 10,000 government schemes which are dysfunctional, completely dysfunctional. I mean, I'm not somebody who usually is pussyfooting around issues, so we need to call things by their names. We can sit here and be blue in the face till morning, and we would not solve any problem or bring education to people who really need it. We look at the caste structure, we look at the rural population of this country. Have we really made any difference after almost close to 70 years of independence? We sit in this hall of Victoria Memorial, we speak in English, we address very, very affluent, well-educated people, but are we really the representative lot? No. So what I decided as an activist, I come from a family of activists, and I went to an institution that is not always happy with the activists. It kind of inadvertently puts out in the field. But being that, you have to know that you need to be there where the action is. Classrooms, libraries, university halls have rarely changed social situations. We need to get down and dirty, and whichever group that we intend to bring any kind of facility, any kind of system to, we need to engage them. We are, after all, outsiders, and we shall always be, forever be outsiders. We have to make ourselves vulnerable and be present among people who really don't have anything. And I think I arrived at my place of work, which is Calcutta, working inside the red light district. The project started with 10,000 rupees, which is a ridiculous sum of money. What can you do with 10,000? 17 years back, yes, you could still do something with 10,000 rupees, and it has grown into a project that has set out many graduates, have consistently year after year educated people, empowered women. And here, empowerment, I have to come back to this is a very radical thought that I hold. Women in prostitution are truly empowered. They really can choose who to have sex with and not. Yes, you want to have sex with me, pay me for it, I will have it. There are millions of women in this world who are caught in relationships, who are caught within the four walls of their bedroom, and who cannot make that choice.
Well said, very well said. Women's empowerment being the very complex issue that it is, I'd like to share this very critical and very shocking statistic with us all. As I was researching for this evening, I realized that for the past 5 years, the number of working women in India has been consistently going down. Yes, Pallabidi, yes. It has been consistently going down. It seems to be very rational, but there must be real reasons for it. Perhaps the sociologist would like to shed some light. Both in the agricultural sector as well as in urban India, the number of working women is going down.
Can I shed light on something else, if you would?
Yes, but also on what I said. Thank you.
You see, I was listening to, as all of you, the panel discussion which took place just before ours, and it was indeed something that I took note of, but I was completely disappointed when the panel concluded on the note of let them, give them. Now what the hell are we talking of? Let them, give them. Then when I reflected over this, then I think we overlook the following. Empowerment, when we use the word empowerment, we talk of two things. One is the capacity to control one's life situation on the one hand, and the other, the authority of doing it, right? Now, the moment we talk about women, we talk in terms of this authority coming from someone else. Let them, give them. When we talk in terms of men, this let them, give them doesn't exist. We men normally are expected to empower ourselves. And I think that's the crux of the matter. We need to recognize in nomenclature, in our thinking, that women must and by necessity empower themselves, who are meant to empower them. And if they are not empowered, it's also because partly they have not been able to empower themselves. I think this is one point that I would like to
Yes,
make.
thank you.
And
Yes.
the company of the women that we have today in the panel, this panel, as well as in the previous panel, is a sufficiently good illustration of the fact that these women among us have empowered themselves. And that's why we are sitting with them today.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Let me pose this question to Srishti. We are seeing a great number of urban women, very well earning women, who would have the potential of complete economic independence, give their, and this is true in the Indian context, and I ask you this because after all, you know of the Indian context, give up their career because their husband earns enough, or because they rightly have some kind of financial security, because the marital system in India is still not so fragile as it is perhaps elsewhere. How would you comment on that?
First of all, in the previous panel, we heard a lot about how confidence is really important for women. But I just wanted to start my comment by saying sometimes a little bit of humility is warranted. And I think I'm dramatically underqualified to be on this panel. Nonetheless, now that I have undersold myself, I have this to say. So I think what we've been hearing so far is really critical, in that there are many complex ways in which we are sociologically as well as psychologically shaped into both calibrating our expectations as well as what we think is the ideal way for someone to behave. So the idea that, I think particularly, in India as well, right? There is a certain extent to which you should be educated. There is a certain extent to which you should be financially independent. But if you earn more than your husband, that's not very good. So I think we need to sort of figure out how we're going to meet those competing demands. One that it's good that you're educated, but maybe not too much. It's good that you're earning, but maybe not too much. The problem here is that there are all of these different social pressures that tell women that if you have financial security, if your husband has financial security, that's good enough for you, and maybe now you can go do something else, like the other ideal, motherhood, as well as the fact that very many companies and organizations across the world, and I'm sure in India, do discriminate against women in terms of employing women in case they someday take maternal leave or they someday have to go and take care of their children. So I think it's all of these complex factors that we need to take into account in terms of how individuals shape their own decisions as well as their own desires of what they both feel capable of doing and what they both feel, as well as what they feel is what they ought to be doing.
Yes, but as the youngest woman on the panel, I'd like you to specifically tackle the point, and this is a serious point. Is it fair on a woman who's been educated and who's been economically independent and could contribute to society and family to then stay back, take a back seat, as the earlier panelists said, be lazy, and then say, this is my choice?
I will be controversial and perhaps unpopular and say yes, in that I think it is our collective responsibility to fix the system. And I think it should be okay for a woman to say, I want to stay at home and be a mother. I don't think it is okay if that choice is coerced. And I would disagree. I don't necessarily think this is a lazy choice to make. It's not a choice that I would make. But I will stand in support of someone who wants to make this choice. Equally, I would also say we should move towards a society where a man can say that, where he can say, I'd like to stay at home and be a father and a house husband, and for us to not be in a place where we would laugh at that idea. I think that's what we should aspire to, and not tell women that somehow choosing to stay at home is, losing their privilege or doing something terrible.
Professor Munshi, thank you, Srishti. Professor Munshi, why do you think we are so far away from this ideal of men actually being able to do this in India? Give up their careers and stay at home. Where is the knot?
You see, there are two reasons I mean, it's a complex issue, but very briefly, there are two issues. Because men are not really enlightened in this country on the whole. Men are not on the whole enlightened. And unless men and women both are enlightened, no society can progress. And I think in this respect, if you will allow me, I think women are far more enlightened than men are in very many ways. The problem with women is, in my eyes, when they get stuck with let me and allow me and things of this kind. And I think that is where we need to recognize that the system that we live in, namely patriarchy, operates not only with external coercion, but it also operates with internal coercion. When you internalize the roles which you are given and thereafter follow them with, and when you deviate, you not only have external sanctions, you also have internal sanctions. I think the day the collective body of our women are able to overcome this, and I see brilliant examples of this being done every day, but I'm talking in terms of numbers, when it is done, I think they would have an additional task. The journey of emancipation wouldn't be complete. They will need to emancipate men.
Yes, yes, please do.
Sorry, very quickly, I just realized something else. The other problem with the way we understand the economic value of labor is also quite patriarchal, in that women who stay at home do work and do a lot of work. They work for more than 12 hours a day, which is much more than a 9-to-5 job. I think the way we understand economic empowerment needs to take into account things like unpaid labor, things like emotional labor, things like the fact that you have to be there 24/7 for your child, things like the fact that you are responsible for their future and for their present. I think, I'm very used to talking in a debating way, so I always say we think when it's just me thinking. That is a very important, and that is one of the reasons why I think it's very harmful to think of only paid labor as being valuable labor, which I think is a great capitalist myth and should be countered.
Yes, that's right. Okay. Yes, yes, sure.
Responding to Shrishti's earlier comment, while I completely respect people's choices, and I think people can be and should be what they choose to be, but in a country like India, where higher education, the money from the government exchequer that supports higher educational institutions is enormous. And for somebody to access that through tremendous competition and then, in the end, maybe graduating from the IIT or going to the IIM and medical school, government, run medical schools, not the private schools. And then to say, oh, I've changed my mind, I don't want to do that. It's kind of being, completely irresponsible towards our collective and universal responsibility of advancing this country. The economic impact of that is huge.
Yes, yes. Urmi, on that note, we need to come to this point. Because we are speaking of empowerment being an economic issue. We have enough number of women in India who, even after marriage, have inherited enough from their parents. But do they have a voice and do they have a choice? No. They choose to pander. As a woman, both of you, I'm going to be asking this because you've lived a life. As a woman, tell me, why is it that we choose to pander despite having the economic independence?
It's because...
And be frank. Don't mince your words.
Very often I have, Indian family wealth is caught up in a system called HUF, which is Hindu Undivided Family. And that is how taxes are filed. So you can be married into a very wealthy family. You can go to the parties wearing your Cartier diamonds, but at the end of the day, you are basically, you don't have anything to call your own. And that is why people stay trapped in terribly abusive relationships, absolutely, hang on to their worthless husbands, and they have this facade of being very affluent, whereas there is not even money enough to buy a tram ticket. And I don't think they are even aware of what's happening in their lives.
Yes.
And for the next generation, we see these big fat Indian weddings spending crores of rupees. Instead of that, the empowerment should be put the money in the name of the girl in the bank, give her economic independence, give her economic literacy. How to invest, how to control your own money. Oh, my husband had the password of my locker. No, never. That doesn't work. And I go back to my own life. I was 6 years old in a local train commute from Batanagar to Calcutta. And I, like all other 6-year-olds, told my father, when you get me married, my father said, I'm not going to get you married. You're going to get married yourself. You will choose the person that you want to marry. Point number 1. Point number 2, you can be whoever you want to be under any circumstances. Point number 3, never have a joint account.
Well, there you go. No discussion on economic issues being the basis of women's empowerment can be complete without a very, very critical aspect of Eastern India. Our maid servants, the house help, the home help. We have tens of thousands of them coming into Calcutta and earning so much more than their husbands and running their households and taking care of their entire families, and yet having absolutely no say in how they spend that money. Their shack is not theirs, their home is not theirs, nothing that they have is theirs. They cannot even decide. In fact, this is a true story. I did not have my home help this morning because her husband has run away with the children. And she says she does not know how she will face the school whenever they're back because he's decided to take them on a trip. It is her money that he uses. So, how do we tackle this kind of a social complexity where women are psychologically bound, Renu, to simply and blindly follow the male? How do you they are so much more real than all of us. Please.
Well, I think it's a matter of women and their predicament not getting better by chance. It has to get better by change and the awareness that change is possible. That they have to go from being afraid, from fear to freedom from fear, from sheer ignorance to the power of knowledge, even if it is basic knowledge, education. To have choices, to be able to make those choices.
May I ask you something here? The earlier panel, because we ran short of time, would have probably discussed in more clear terms how women are an obstacle to their empowerment. So in all these cases, in rural India, in poor Bengal, there is not a single mother-in-law that will stand by her daughter-in-law. Very, very rarely ever. It's the exception that stands with the daughter-in-law. How does that change, Renu?
That is a mindset because she herself has been relegated, oppressed, treated badly perhaps, abused, subjugated. So she feels that the same treatment should be meted out to her daughter-in-law as a matter of convention. But it is not only the woman's mindset, her attitudinal stance, it is also the man's. It's very, very important because the march has to be together. Gender inequality is not sustainable. So I was talking about the woman getting freedom from a sense of lack of worth, self-worth, to self-respect, from stagnation to opportunity, and to make her choices, whether she wants to be by the fireside or she wants to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, or she wants to raise the choice, or to raise her family and keep a meticulous kitchen, or to take her place in the Council of Nations. It is a choice. A choice always comes with education, and education leads to economic empowerment and vice versa. Today, why is it that women have to work twice as hard, do twice as well to be considered half as good?
Yes.
And like Margaret Thatcher said, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman.
Yes. Yes.
So you do have a woman who has equal capability, equal intelligence, equal capacity, equal strength, maybe more. But she is deprived of the opportunity. Who deprives her is another question. Whether she deprives herself or society does or the man does, but it is the capitalizing on opportunity which is most important.
Yes, yes. Yes, Professor Munshi, please.
Well, to answer your question, with respect to maids or ministers or whoever, I think, it's not going to be an economically dependent woman who can do it. It's not going to be an illiterate woman who can do it. But the point is, it's not just that, there is something more that is needed. And that something more can be an empowerment of women by themselves, individually as well as collectively. When women can work together and make it an issue of social concern, a social movement which raises awareness, which confronts men to accept the changed reality, I think society changes. So having said this, I would say in academic jargon, if you like, economic independence is necessary condition, but not sufficient condition. You need something more. And for that something more, you need awareness, you need dream. A woman
You
must
need support.
A woman must
Support.
dream like a man must dream in order to succeed. If you are without any dream, you stay put. You need to dream. And I'm quite sure the women sitting here, including you, have had dreams which you have pursued. And once you have your dream, you pursue it, you break that barrier. And you come to a stage when you can tell that I could do it only because I had the possibility which I took with my both hands.
Okay, on that note, there is another small question I must ask you before we go in for the wrapping up comments and move on to the youngsters. Professor Munshi, amongst the two major factors that emerge for the decline of the number of working women in India, one of them is positive, which is a lot of them choose to take the path of entrepreneurship, which is very laudable, okay, because self-employment has its amazing virtues. But the other factor that emerges is that home is once again the safest place to be. There is too much of harassment outside the home.
Frankly,
including in offices too, because it's now coming out in the open. What do you say to that?
Frankly, I have not looked at these figures. I'm not aware that the number is declining.
Okay.
So I am not really very clear whether the number indeed,
yes.
and if at all, in which sector.
Fair enough.
So if I'm not clear about the number,
Fair
I
enough.
can't give
I
you an
agree.
answer.
I agree. Srishti has a point to make, please.
I just wanted to make a comment regarding harassment. I find it implausible that that is the case. I think there is a perception that the home is safer than the office, and certainly workplace harassment policies are not excellent. I think the most cases of sexual violence and rape are often perpetrated by individuals closely known to the victim, and are not in fact people who you meet on the street and such. So I think there is a much greater problem to be looked at in the way we delegitimize and make invisible harassment or abuse that takes place within households, including sort of a misrecognition of domestic rape and so on. So I think that's another thing to bear in mind in terms of how the home is perceived to be safe, or when it might not necessarily be, or what we think of as legitimate sexual behavior when it in fact might be coercion.
With the opening of the economy in India, a large number of women had to take up professions which meant that they worked the same difficult nightly hours as men did. And the infrastructure in India is by no means geared to give women a safe run on the road. So your parents may still bear with the difficult option of staying awake for you at nights till you come back from your shift. Perhaps your husband and his family will not. Would you like to say something on that, Urmi?
I think, yeah, the whole work scenario has changed like dramatically over this last decade, or maybe 7, 8 years more specifically. And as you mentioned that, yes, our families, our birth families might be ready to change that, accept the changes in our regular perceptions of, oh, what are the neighbors going to say? You're returning at 2 o'clock in the morning, some car is coming and dropping you. Parents might, at the end of the day, come to terms with it. Families, that one is the matrimonial set, that family might not always be comfortable with that. And I also feel when we talk about, gender-based violence, it's bound to go up now because the gender perception is being very seriously challenged. So as women are getting more and more educated, women are becoming more articulate, assertive, and they're competent, and they are competing with men at the same level. So for a limited number of jobs, there are more contenders, and in that way, many of the men are actually going to get left behind. So it is for them, the perception is, oh, why is she out here? I mean, this is not her place. So that is where professional jealousies begin, and they start to cut you down and create situations, and that kind of percolates down even to the level.
It translates into a personal sphere in
absolutely.
a very, very, very aggressive manner.
Yeah.
Yes. 1 second, Professor Munshi. Yes, Renu must say something. I'll come to you after.
I think, Urmi, your point, though well taken, I think that we are talking more and referring to the urban sector, where where women are far more in control of their lives. They are far more confident. Even if they come home at 2 o'clock, they are confident that they can. And of course, there are exceptions of harassment and maybe molestation, but there is, again, legislation against that. But 80% of India, 90% maybe, is rural. And I know when we talked about maidservant, my maidservant came to me with a ligament torn, a fractured elbow, many, many bruises, because she was the repeated victim of sexual and physical abuse. Her husband was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic. And she tells me that this is a very, very common scenario. She feels empowered in my home because she's earning that X amount which she can help her family and children with. But she feels unsafe in her own home. She has talked about hundreds of times when she has been subjected to marital rape. Where is the legislation in our country for that? It's also because women feel they need to keep quiet. What will society say? What will people say?
No, Renu, there's something else. The legislation will not happen because the giants amongst our political leaders refuse to accept that there is something called marital rape. Look at what's happening in North India. Yeah. None of them accept that there's the concept of marital rape. Professor Munshi, we are digressing, so we need that comment from you before we move on, please.
I mean, a very brief comment, and it was a thought which struck me. You see, in the 19th century, India, especially this part of India, we had a number of social reformers. If you look at the history of India, you will find in different parts of India, not just political leaders wanting political power, but there were social reformers. And these reformers were looked up by the general run of the people because they were considered thinking minds, thinking for the society. Now, we don't have such reformers anymore. We have film stars. We follow on our newspapers
our celebrities
and
have
magazines.
Changed. Absolutely.
We just are crazy about celebrities. We are collecting gossips about them and things of this kind, we have no social reformers. Yes. I would like to think that perhaps of the problem that we are discussing at multiple levels can find a solution if we had not just social reformers, if we had social reformers who were women. Now, women have proved themselves in different fields, whether it's industry, whether it is entrepreneurship, whether it's education, and so on. Indian women are in the forefront in very many fields, but I would be very happy to see that Indian women coming forward and becoming social reformers. Because if they did, they would bring to reforming society a touch which is typically woman's touch, which is a touch which is sustenance, which is a touch which is bringing up a society in peace where children can grow up happily, and a touch which in the current context is efficient and competent.
Thank you, Professor Munshi. Let us now move on to our student participants. Inga Thiessen from the London School of Economics.
I have a lot of scattered sort of thoughts on this, being a woman myself. When we see yesterday that Mike Pence was sworn in as the American vice president, a man who has openly said that women in the workplace are a danger to society, I think the topic of women's empowerment as an economic issue is actually extremely prudent today. Frightening, isn't it? I'd just like to underscore Shrishti's comment about sort of our hyper-capitalist society, and that women's empowerment as an economic issue means that we will never have gender equality or women's equality without economic equality. In our society, where we unfortunately value an individual's sort of contribution to the economy, that is what determines their value in society. Where we look and we find that women are either entirely underpaid or not paid at all for the work that they do, it is self-evident that women will remain undervalued in society or not valued at all. That was just sort of my thoughts.
The feminist movement, we've just been preaching to the choir. And I think it's very, very encouraging today, this evening's gathering, to see that we have more or less probably a 50-50 representation here. And we just have to keep our conversation going. You know, it begins with creating a circle, like we would always call it a circle of sisterhood. And that does not mean only sisters. We bring in our brothers, we bring in our parents, we bring in our male colleagues, we bring in anybody and whoever is willing to listen to us. And that is what feminism of today is. It is inclusive. And the greatest feminists today, I think I could count 5 on my fingertip, and 2 would be men. I would name Nicholas Kristof, New York Times journalist, as one. And of course, President Obama, who's gone on, in public and say, this is how a feminist looks like. So men no longer need to hear the term feminist and look at themselves as lepers. They should be like proud, yes, I am a feminist and I stand by everybody.
Michelle from Harvard University.
Hi, thank you for giving me the chance to speak. So what I kind of want to talk about is what I think women in society have as a forced choice. So I think a lot of the times when women are considering a professional career, they think that they have to pick between being a professional and having a family. Because oftentimes in families, even if the woman has a professional job, they're still expected, on top of their professional work, to come home and still be the person who cooks for the entire family, the person who cleans for the entire family, still be the leader in the household. So I think that when women are considering whether or not they should be professionals, they often think, how am I going to do this if I have 2 children, 3 children, or 4 children? So I think that is a massive detriment and is a massive reason why women either don't choose to go into professional careers or choose to not take leadership positions in their professions. So my question to you all is, how do we work to stop that? How do we acknowledge that that seemingly forced choice is really a false choice?
Professor Munshi.
I must speak as a sociologist on this. Quite apart from talking, take the conversation forward. Quite apart from this, I think what has happened is we don't have suitable institutions in place where such false choices are not imposed upon women. I'll give a very concrete example. If there are more places where children, at the place of work, where children can be looked after, then partly this problem is resolved, partly. If there are such institutions which are created, which enable women bringing up children, carrying their professional roles as well, then I think the problem becomes less. I don't say that it will vanish. And then the need of the day is to create enough pressure so that such institutions are created. It will not cost a company all that much to create a creche for children, but the companies want to save money, and if there are no pressures, they don't see any need for doing it. I think that is where, instead of saying I will not work because I have a child to bring up, I think the tension has to be put, and this cannot be individual effort, it has to be collective, that there should be more such possibilities which take the burden of women a little, reduce the burden of women.
Right, Srishti has a quick comment.
So I think Michelle's question and Inga's question are really related, because alongside the institutional changes that are absolutely important. So I was going to suggest that Michelle and Inga's questions are related, because alongside the institutional changes which must be made, this is also just very simply a micropolitical and familial issue to deal with. Why do women, I mean, the question really is, why do women feel or are made to come back and cook for the entire family when they've been out working all day? I mean, this is where I think men should step up and say, well, maybe I'll cook dinner 5 times a week, or I'll cook dinner 3 times a week. That's less than half. Or maybe I should take care of the children today. And I mean, those are the kind of conversations that we can begin to have. Very often we think of women's empowerment and feminism as grand projects, and that all women must be liberated all at once and we must be out in the streets in revolution. What I think we need to put in is quiet daily labor, and that's where it begins to change.
For long we've suffered from maternal guilt. A lot of us, our mothers did, a lot of my generation did too. But what is hitting us anew is a daughter's guilt. We are a generation that is also guilty of not taking care of our parents. So here we are, empowered women who are wanting to actually make a difference in as many lives as we can. But as Professor Munshi says, without much support. And the reason corporate India, or maybe the government of India, will not take active measures is because for every woman out of the workforce, there is a man who needs it more, who needs that job more. That is the psychology. So on that note, we move on to Theodora from the University of Sydney.
Thank you. My question is actually very related to this, because I think the false choice between work and having a family that is presented is because we have workplaces that are so hostile. And I think that is because workplaces, individual workplaces, do not care if they have women involved. It is the role of the woman to make it work, to make her schedule work, to fit in the childcare, to figure out who picks up the kids, whilst the workforce remains inflexible and unwilling to accommodate change. And I think that if you, for example, had a situation where maybe it was men who had to breastfeed children instead of women, you'd see workplaces which had breastfeeding stations at every desk and 10-minute paid breaks for men to be able to breastfeed their children. And that sort of need would be accommodated. But in a situation where it is women that are asking for that, or women who are needing that, it's not seen as a necessity, even though in reality it is. And I think that the kind of question I have here is, how can we as a society show that women who have needs that are different to men do not have needs that are greater than men? I think that's often the way that it is perceived, that a woman's needs, when they differ from the accepted universal need of a man, is something more, is something extra, is something on top of what should be provided. How can we instead recharacterize this to show that this is something that is a fundamental basic need that should be provided within all workspaces to accommodate women?
Yes, Professor Munshi wants to take this.
Very, very briefly, you know, in IIM, I would land up very often interviewing students for admission. And this is an extremely competitive situation, and every little mark here or there makes a difference. Once I was interviewing, I was the chairman of the panel, and we have normally industry people as well interviewing, and this person from a very sophisticated person from a multinational company, he was, I noticed, whenever a girl's candidate appeared, instead of going into technical discussion about her background and things like that, he would start talking immediately about, tell me, if you go into IIM and you pass, and then you marry, and then you have a child, blah, blah. We know the story. I was very uncomfortable. So on one occasion, I told him that, please, I would be very happy if you didn't ask it. Second time, another girl student appeared. He asked it again. I had to be blunt. I told the girl student, candidate, you don't have to answer this. And he felt slighted. He left the room. But let me tell you one thing. I thought it over quite a bit. And I came to the following conclusion. He was not a nasty guy. He was a very nice person. But he had to ask this because somewhere at the back of his mind, he thought bringing up a family is a woman's job. And whether or not a woman will be able to take care of the company job and the woman's job, that was the dilemma. I think that is where we need to change the perspective. We need to understand bringing children to this world and bringing them up is not just a woman's job. It is our collective societal job. And the moment the society, the corporate world, the educational institution, and the family recognizes that this is something that is the job of the family, the job of society, the job of the company, and so on, the moment we think of this, the perspective changes. I'll give you a small example. You are seeing a lot of problems happening in Europe because of migration problem, right? Now, to Germany, for instance, I'm familiar with Germany. I go there very often. You have noticed that a good deal, I mean, the entire European Union is likely to collapse on this ground. Do you know what's happening to Germany? Part of the reason why such openness is being shown by German society towards migrants is because German society does not have a healthy growth rate. That doesn't have a healthy growth rate. Translated to corporate terms, German industry, in order to be competitive, does not have enough manpower. And therefore, bring these people who are young and willing to work, and you make your society competitive. My question is, can't it be translated in the following manner? How can German society have a healthy growth rate and pursue policies, both men and women, whereby they are not reduced to a situation where they have necessarily a negative growth rate? This is not a woman's problem. This is society's problem.
On that note, Professor Munshi, when I mentioned that the number of working women is consistently going down every year, fact is that most women in a middle-level managerial job were quite willing to give up their careers right after marriage, before motherhood, because of two reasons. Their peers and their superiors at work were not treating them at par with the men. They had already concluded, like the gentleman on your panel, that this woman will get married, which is fine, excellent, but why is it that one is never given a chance to prove herself where she could be able to handle both in an extremely balanced manner? And secondly, these women were also dropping out because their matrimonial homes were not as supportive, because their mothers-in-law said, we don't care if you work, you have to fulfill your homely responsibilities before you can go out to work.
Make them do it.
Of course,
second,
we are making them do it.
Create institutions.
Be under no doubt, Professor Munshi.
I have no doubt.
If they will not fall in line, they will be made to.
I have no doubt. But what I'm also additionally saying, create institutions.
See, the point is, at the end of it all, this entire situation is very unfair. On half the population of the world, it's a very unfair situation. You need us to procreate. You know that leopard shark, ladies and gentlemen, the other day? That leopard shark has surprisingly, marvelously managed to procreate on its own. And when they tested its 3 little babies, they realized the babies didn't have the male chromosome. So no point in pushing us to a point where we will simply say, gosh, we can do without you. As it is, being a woman is so tough because you've got to deal with men all the time. It's a very difficult situation. Because yes, you just learn to kind of be happy and nice and sweet and be joyous about it. It's not a very joyful situation. But let us go to Seamus now. There he is. Seamus from the University of Sydney.
Hi. I think you guys have all done a wonderful job talking about the economic challenges that women face, and I think that we all take that for granted and recognize that. My question then is, women often have to make a choice, and feminist organizations often have to make a choice between which barriers they want to prioritize and which ones they want to break down first. So for instance, in Mali, women had to make a choice between fighting a corrupt family court and pushing for employment reform. The same is true in Saudi Arabia, where women might have to choose between the freedom to transport themselves and the freedom to have a job. My question then is quite simple, just which barriers do you think women should be focusing on the most, and how should they make those decisions?
Do you want to take it, Rendu? Yeah.
Well, it's not a direct answer to your question, but I think we have to begin to recognize one thing. Women were afraid all this while, and men today have exposed the fact that they are limited, because they are afraid of this strong woman who is emerging with a voice. And there is no force equal to a woman who wants to be heard. Today, you have a man who is smart, intelligent, works very hard, and can make 10 million. And you have a woman, what can she do? She gives birth, she raises her children, she sweeps and swabs and washes and cooks, tosses up a good salad, and can make that 10 million. So it's a question of the woman's capacity as equal to men. But again, we have to face the factual predicament, the current situation of injustice still existing.
Seamus, I'd like to address that. You see, empowerment, just as we are culturally diverse throughout the world, so beyond our universal values and our universally, our uniform issues, there is this very strong cultural aspect. All of us have to determine for ourselves. Within India, which is such a diverse society, women in North India, even today, have this extremely pressing problem of trying to break free of needing to cover their heads, of needing to be under a veil, whereas women in Eastern India don't have that issue. Neither do the women in South India. So it is a cultural construct. We need to tackle it whichever way it seems fair and right to us. We firmly believe that the way forward is not to knock the other gender down. We are very happy in skirting you in making our way forward, but please do not obstruct our way. It's not right. That's our only request. Thank you. Christopher, where are you hiding, my dear? Christopher from Cambridge.
Thanks very much. I think a lot of the discussion has focused on the fact that the family and contributing to raising children is perceived exclusively as a female domain, and that affects how women are treated at work, it affects how women make decisions. And some countries in response to this have taken quite active steps to encourage and ultimately force men to take a greater role in the household. So I'm thinking of, for instance, Sweden, where if as a man you don't take parental leave and you don't help raise your child, you'll lose out financially. And so I was wondering what you think would be good and effective ways in which both society could encourage and potentially push men into taking a role, which I think we all agree would really help female empowerment.
Professor Munshi wants to do this.
Well, you see, the last panel, as I said, ended with let them, give them, so on. I think our panel, going by the discussion so far, let us. Your question. How does one take care of it? Let the family, man and woman, take decision. whether or not we would go into whether or not we would have a child, and once we have a child, how would we bring up, what would be the arrangement? Let society and let communities sit together and take decisions, and for that purpose work out creative solutions. We have not worked out creative solutions, especially men, because it's been very convenient. The decision is very simple. If we have a child, it's a woman's responsibility. She must pay the price, and if she doesn't, her problem. The issue is, if having a child and having a society reproducing itself is a concern, then let us find ways of doing it, and I am quite confident, given the ingenuity that human beings have, we'll be able to devise institutions which are not of the model of patriarchal family.
Thank you, Professor Munshi. Srishti has a comment on this.
Just very briefly, I absolutely agree with what the professor says, and I just wanted to sort of maybe try and reframe this question. So when we talk about women's empowerment, the underlying premise there is that women are weak and therefore need to be empowered. I think the way in which we also ought to be thinking about this is in terms of empowerment and men or masculinity. I'm really heartened to see a lot of very young gentlemen amongst the audience. Do we not think it is utterly patronizing and infantilizing for you to be told that you will move from a situation where your mother cooks for you to a situation where your wife will cook for you? To move to sort of grow up into a world where it is your wife who must take care of a child who you have produced jointly. So I think this is more a question, really, of raising sons, irrespective of whether or not they someday choose to be fathers, into independent men who do not depend on women to wash their laundry and darn their socks and comb their hair and raise their babies. So I think that's something that's really critical.
Whilst I totally agree with both of you that the conversations start at home and the change begins at home, I would also completely agree with Christopher. Support comes from legislation. If a man knows that he will not be penalized at the workforce, but be appreciated for giving help to his wife at home or to his daughter at home, he'd probably be more inclined to do so. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, it's important for us to conclude thus. It is a very complicated issue, but I think what has emerged unsaid is this. It is not economic empowerment that makes us empowered. It is the social and individual values, most of which are depleting very quickly and very, very fast in our lives, that have led us to a situation where we are seeming to be aggressors in a field where men reign supreme. As Swami Vivekananda said, and he's one of our biggest saints, philosophers of modern India. He said, a bird cannot fly on one wing alone. No society will progress if we think of each other as antagonists. We are not. On that note, thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you.